How are you all doing? Quite an unusual circumstance that we've been finding ourselves in recently. How's your lockdown experience been out there? I would imagine that there's been a lot of firsts, and there's been a lot of firsts for me as well. I've been involved in more webinars than I ever imagined I would ever be involved in, and it's been quite fascinating to gain during these webinars, to gain knowledge about the industry, but also to gain a very small insight into the worlds and the houses and the homes of people that we're speaking to. And we usually don't get that level of sort of individuality. We don't usually get to see into people's homes, so it's been quite strange. And I guess, like many of you, you might have found it quite interesting just to see what people's home office setups look like. And I found it absolutely fascinating. I've been in awe, frankly, of a lot of people's home office setups. We've seen old oak bookcases in the background, trophy cabinets. Some people are doing it from their sunroom. And yeah, I've been quite in awe by how professionally set up a lot of you are out there. Especially given that my home office is it's my youngest daughter's bedroom, and it's a little different. This is my home office. I've basically spent my lockdown 12 hours a day approximately in a land of kittens, fairies, unicorns, and rainbows, quite frankly. And it's been kind of surreal. So if you can just see in the corner on the right hand side, that you'll see my monitor, and that's where I'm set up. So yeah, I'm surrounded by a childlike innocence, the hopes and dreams of the next generation, and actually, it's quite inspiring, actually, because you do sort of see things through a different light when you're sat here, and it feels different to being in a corporate office. So you're jealous now of my home office, I'm sure. So there you go. The reason that I'm telling you that is, I could have created a virtual background and you'd be none the wiser. Or I could have just had my plain green wall and not shown you what it really looks like. But I wanted to be brutally honest with you, and unashamedly so. I'm not embarrassed about this. And as a result of that, you're probably more likely to trust me because you can see I'm very clearly being very honest with you. And we've heard a few of our speakers talking about the importance of trust as we move forward as an industry. So we absolutely understand that we need to start being more truthful, generally speaking, really. And in our industry, we've had a penchant really for telling white lies for quite some time, if we're being honest. And I'd like you to focus in your minds the importance of truth and trust as we continue on this talk today. So how are you feeling about the recovery? It's interesting, isn't it? We're starting to get nearer to the supposed recovery, and we might be feeling nervous, excited. Maybe you're more than ready to travel again yourselves as well, as we start to enter the recovery phase of what we're going through. But for me, I'm not convinced that the word recovery is the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but recovery, when we look at the definition of recovery, it feels wrong. A return to the normal state of mind and strength. And Carolyn talked about the new normal, which we'll be going into. Do we want to return to the normal that we were at before? I suppose, we use recovery because if we wanted to change it to something which, I'd like to see, which is, a radically different and changed tourism offering, which balances more evenly the needs of travelers, communities, and the environment. Well, it's just easier to say recovery, and you can't fit what I said into a hashtag, and probably wouldn't fit on Twitter either. But recovery does seem to intimate a return to the previous state of affairs, and I'm not convinced that that's a noble or just aim, if I'm honest. So what was normal before COVID-19? Well, this was normal. This was how we inspired people to travel. It was through imagery like this. This is the stuff that we showed people to inspire them to travel and experience the world. And you find these images, I got these images from major travel websites, blogs, posters, and other travel media meant to inspire us. This one is Maya Bay in Thailand. I'm sure you've seen this image 100 times before whenever they're promoting Thailand. It's just a glorious image, wonderful colors. This one is Levant Beach in Salou in northern Spain. It's a glorious stretch of golden beach. And, I've got to point out that these photos weren't taken during the COVID-19 lockdown. These were taken at other times of the year before coronavirus ever hit. So what you see here, they haven't been photoshopped either. This is what these photographs look like. That's just a wonderful beach. And this, of course, is the Ponte della Paglia in Italy, which again is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful destination. So that's what we sold you on. That's what we got your juices flowing and made you want to travel and experience these destinations for yourselves. And this is what you got when you paid your money and you went out there. This is the view from the Acropolis in Athens. A little bit different to the photo that we showed you before, but I'm sure each one of these individuals is having a fantastic time, really relaxing on their holiday and exploring the cultural wonders of Athens. This is Maya Bay in Koh Phi Phi in Thailand. Had to close down just over a year ago due to too much tourism, and it was destroying the natural habitats around that whole area. But that's what it looks like most of the time. And you need to understand that, for most of these people, this is the Levant Beach in Spain during the summer season. Did each one of these individuals, is that what they signed up to? When they saw the photographs that were selling them Levant Beach in Spain, is that what they signed up to? And this is the experience for 80%, according to the seasonality curves. This is the experience for 80% of the people that travel to Salou. Are we being truthful? I'm not sure. This is the Ponte della Paglia in Venice. Slightly different photo. This one. Don't often see this one in the tourism promotional pieces for some reason. And also, I noticed when I was going through these photographs, we absolutely shudder when you look at these in the light of the current social distancing rules and regulations that we're looking at. It looks just absolutely absurd. It's amazing how quickly things change, isn't it? So, serious question for you all. What were those last few images? Why would they not be used in each destination's promotional materials? Serious question. Why aren't those images used? Those are the experiences that approximately between 70 and 80% of all visitors to those destinations, that's the experience they're getting. Why would we not show people those images? And what are the implications for the answer that you've just said to your screen or to your colleagues? Have we been truthful? Can consumers trust us? And frankly, why would they trust us? So let's have a look at what we want to recover to. The good old days. So this is from the Wto Tourism Monitor, which comes out every year. Great publication, free of charge to download. We can see here that this was from 2018. We were up to 1.4 billion international tourist arrivals, which was up 5% on the previous year. 1.7 trillion US dollars, a huge amount of money coming in, up 4% on the previous year. And we can see that we'd experienced our 9th consecutive year in arrivals growth. So all going really well. There were more tourists than ever before in 2018, and I'm sure 2019 will bear out to be exactly the same when those figures come out. Every region in the world saw more visitors, and the WTO and others were quoted as saying, and it was on LinkedIn, that it had been the best ever year for tourism. And it does make you wonder. It depends on how you're measuring what the best year for tourism is. If it's just arrivals, then yeah, absolutely. So we've seen consistent growth where even the global financial crisis, when at the time, it was like the end of the world. It was horrendous for not just for travel and tourism, but for every industry. But when we look back on the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, it was just a slight blip, and we recovered really very quickly along the same path that we were going on, this relentless march forwards. And what we're marching forwards to, well, the UNWTO, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, they did some studies which were created to predict really where tourism was going in terms of tourism arrivals by 2030. And the study showed that by 2030, we'd be on 1.8 billion international tourist arrivals. It also showed that we'd be on 1.4 billion international tourist arrivals by 2020. And as we've just said, we hit that figure in 2018. So, you know, we're 200 million ahead of where we were predicted to be. So that's probably brought some quite unique challenges for us. But I would imagine that by 2030, again, assuming there is a recovery from coronavirus, we'd be over 2 billion. So then coronavirus came along. Obviously, this is the knitted version of the knitted strain of coronavirus. Can't remember where I got the photo from. I've seen it represented so many times. I'm not sure the colors are accurate. I don't know what color coronavirus is. I've seen it green, I've seen it blue. But anyway, I like the knitted version, frankly. So coronavirus came along, and you know, this is some of the stuff that we lost. So this is always shown by the World Travel and Tourism Council and the United Nations World Tourism Organization as the benefits of travel and tourism to the world. You know, some great stuff here: jobs, economic growth, 7% of the world's exports, 10% of the world's GDP. I guess a lot of you out there have seen this a million times, frankly. But this is all the stuff that we lost as a result of the coronavirus, because well, you know, we went from over-tourism and everything going well to literally a drop off the edge of the cliff. But this is some of the stuff that we gained. We went from over-tourism to zero tourism overnight. So this is the stuff that we gained. So this is the opposite of recovery. This was the degradation of the tourism industry. You can see the bottoms now of the canals in Venice. The lions are taking a nap on the roads now, which were, you know, previously busy pre-coronavirus, and you can actually see the Himalayas from northern India now. So I guess when you can no longer see the mighty Himalayas from northern India due to a polluted haze, then you'll know that recovery is well on the way for travel and tourism. So good stuff. So we also lost this. Over tourism, very familiar, I think, to anybody that's been following the industry. We've seen over tourism in pretty much every region of the world. And this is also what we lost as a result of coronavirus. Like I keep saying, we went from over tourism to zero tourism in a heartbeat. And when we talk about over tourism, I can't stand it. I always try to say so-called over tourism, because, you know, what is it over? You know, if I'm overweight, which actually I am, if you're asking, slightly. The reason I know that I'm overweight is because doctors and medical practitioners and experts have determined that for somebody of my lifestyle, my age, my height, they've prescribed a certain range which would be the ideal and optimum weight for me. So when we talk about over tourism, you know, over what? What's the point of reference for this? And that's a really, really big question that as an industry, we have not got an answer for. It's, I suppose, linked a little bit to the Goldilocks paradox from the story of Goldilocks and the three bears, where they have the porridge and one's too hot, one's too cold, and one is just right. It's just the right amount of everything. So, you know, we know what too many is because it's over tourism. We now know what too few is because, you know, it dropped off the edge of a cliff due to coronavirus. So, you know, what does just right look like? How many tourists is just right? You know, not per year, but at any given time, you know, at any particular day in a destination, what's the optimum number of tourists? And it's an intriguing question, and it's one that I've asked when we used to go to events. I used to go to all of these travel events, you know, World Travel Market, ITB, IMEX, all of these, and I would speak to ministers for tourism, CEOs of tourism authorities, and I would ask them what I thought was quite a reasonable question, which is, what's the capacity of your destination? You know, what's the most amount of tourists that you can have at any one given time, and indeed then also for you know, an average year. And they would talk to me about the number of bed nights which they have in their destination, and they would talk to me about Airbnb nights. But what about the road capacity? What about the taxis, the public transport, the infrastructure? You know, how many people can that take? So we need to get a better handle on the distribution of our tourism to avoid these pressure points. We need to understand what is the right amount of tourism. So this is a seasonality curve. It's for a European destination, actually. I've obviously made it a lot more basic. We're not talking about 5 tourists, but along the y-axis there is obviously the number of tourists arrivals, and across the bottom is the months of the year. And this is pretty typical. Usually it's a bell-shaped curve. And we need to understand what our seasonality curve looks like, and really where the optimum level is on that. So you have to look at where the pain points are. So on this particular one, it would look like you've got some major pressure points at July and August, for example. On the months that I've highlighted there is when 75% of arrivals take place. Actually, it's over a 6-month period, and that's for Turkey. And by the way, that peak there where it's 5, by the way, that might be fine. That's no concern. It depends on what number of tourism arrivals you can take in your destination. So this curve, if your curve looks this shape for a seasonality of your destination, it's not necessarily scary. It's only scary if you've estimated that the peak, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I'm waving it over the 3 there. If that's where really the peak is, for it to be comfortable, for it to be a good experience for the tourists and for the local community, if it's there, then you've got problems in the peak months. If it's right up beyond 6 in 7, then obviously you've got no issue. This is another seasonality curve. So this was based on the same numbers as that previous one, and it's just a little bit of a flatter version of it. Same number of visitor arrivals, but obviously on the last one we got up to 5 and 6 on the y-axis. This time you get up to sort of 2.5, more evenly distributed. And again, this isn't necessarily a good thing. It depends on what the number of tourists is that you can welcome into your destination. If the optimum number of tourists is 1.5 million, then you've got big problems. So this seasonality curve, this could be Venice, it could be Las Vegas, which they've got a huge amounts of tourism. It could equally be Myanmar, where they've got it pretty flat, but actually they've still got a lot of room for growth. So yeah, generally speaking, we're talking about flattening the seasonality curve. And when we talk about flattening the seasonality curve, there's different ways in which we can do this. We can increase prices, mainly during the peak seasons, traditional peak seasons, to deter some visitors. We can develop more destinations and resorts, and that's been touted a lot. They call it tourism dispersal. We need to move people from Venice to Trieste, and I've got a problem with that, because for me, if you're moving the tourism arrivals to another destination down the road to develop that destination, presumably you're going to build new hotels which will be occupied for 6 months of the year and running at 20% occupancy for the remaining 6 months of the year. That hardly feels sustainable to me. Surely the first choice should be fill the times of the year that you've got currently. So encourage and promote tourism during the quieter weeks and months of the year. And I've got to ask, why do we not do this? I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is what used to be on the maps in the old days, ye old days, I should say. Here be dragons. They used to have this on maps when they didn't really know what was out there, but they knew it was scary stuff. It was the great unknown. And that's the same with our low seasons. I think we sort of feel that it's the great unknown and it's filled with fear. And actually, for the same reasons that, Marco Polo, Christopher Columbus, and all of the rest wanted to explore these regions of the world where there were dragons, it's filled with adventure. There's something different. There's something exciting about it as well. But be under no illusion. We as an industry are responsible for the seasonality issue. We absolutely are at fault here. As travel agents and tour operators, we were solicited for advice, and we informed people when was the best time to visit each destination. And I used to do it myself. People used to come into me when I was a travel agent and ask, when's the best time to go to, I don't know, Koh Samui, or when's the best time to go to Sydney or Manchester or Cork in Ireland? And we come up with all of these kind of graphics which show this is a good one. I'm not picking out on these ones. The intention's right. It's when's the best time to visit every region in the world, but best according to what parameters? What's the tourist looking for? If it's just about weather, then okay. we can sort of do something on that. But maybe if they're looking for something more than weather. I've traveled the world over during the low seasons, mainly because I used to go on fam trips and educationals, and the fam trips and educationals in the industry were always done during the low seasons because they had spare hotel rooms, the flights were cheaper and everything else. And I was always amazed at what a wonderful experience it was in each of these destinations. And I couldn't believe that why anybody else wasn't traveling at those times of the year. So what I do see is I see a lack of confidence that our low season product is strong enough. And it's almost as if we don't see the value in our destinations during different times of the year. We don't see it ourselves, and it's our home. That I find bizarre, quite frankly. So, for those seeking something authentic, something different, something adventurous, if you're seeking excitement, culture, heritage, weather is not the crucial factor. As Sir Ranulph Fiennes says, there's no such thing as bad weather, only inappropriate clothing. And many are craving all of these things. We need to target them more accurately. So what's the difference between a city in the summer and the same city in the winter? Different seasons. I did up this example, gosh, must have been just half a year ago. I created an example, and I did it on Expedia or one of those kind of guys, of a Thursday to Sunday break in Rome, actually, just randomly. Flights with Ryanair, including seat allocation, same flight times out and back, same hotel, 5-star hotel, the NH Romana Palazzo, which is a lovely hotel. Transfers to and from Rome Airport, 2-day hop-on, hop-off premium bus tour, as you do, to get a bit of an overview. And you can see clearly the difference in price, apart from anything else. But one was in December and one was in July. Here's the difference in the experience. In the summer, in the July one, there'll be queues of up to 3 hours for attractions like seeing the Colosseum, for example. Regularly, there'll be queues for 3 hours to get to see the Colosseum. In winter, there are pretty much no queues. In summer, it's twice the price. It's half the price in the winter, as we just saw. The service levels in the summer during the peak seasons in Rome likely to be poorer due to the crowds. Studies have shown that levels of service in hotels decrease the closer they get to full occupancy for, I guess, pretty obvious reasons. In the winter, there's more of a chance for local interaction. There's less tourists around, so there's a greater chance that locals will have time for you. And actually, you're going to be more welcomed there because they need more tourism during the low periods to pay the bills. And of course, for both of those, in the summer and the winter, all of the sites are still there. The Colosseum's not going anywhere. St. Peter's Square's not going. It's all still there. The only other difference really is in winter you need to bring a jacket. Well, what was the purpose of your trip to Rome anyway? Was it just about the weather, or was it to see the cultural and historical beauty of the destination? Bringing a jacket, well, that's no hardship. So if you had a business which had a 70% reliance on one product or income stream, I believe it would be patently folly if you didn't monitor and manage it incredibly carefully, and B, if you didn't make serious efforts to reduce the overall reliance on that single product line. This is why so many European destinations are frantically trying to reopen their resorts right now, even though it's quite likely in many cases that it's unsafe to do so. The single biggest product line is catering to peak season clients. In this case, the summer is their probably, if it's not their only opportunity for tourism revenue, it's certainly their most significant one. So what happens when something comes along and decimates that cash cow? And what if it's not just a blip, but a crisis, and actually a rather large crisis, like we've seen with coronavirus? I was going to show you a video here of Blackadder, but we tried it before and the sound didn't work, so I'll skip over that. But it's basically Blackadder talking about just how large a crisis we're going through, particularly right now when we look at coronavirus. But we are at the dawn of a new day. As David Bierman pointed out in our first episode, crisis is just another word for opportunity. We are starting again from the very bottom. It's a new beginning, and the time to flatten our seasonality curve has never been better and more needed than ever before. Now is indeed the time. These are some of the travel trends which have been identified by ABTA here in the UK, Forbes, CN Traveller, and Wanderlust, and many others. We're all craving real experiences more and more. You know, you hear this word. Chris always says he's sick of hearing about it, authenticity, and it is. It's right. Everyone's looking for something which is more authentic, more real. We're looking for stuff that's sustainable, responsible. We recognise that we as individuals have a role to play in the future of our planet, and we want that to be taken into consideration when we travel as well. We're also going to want to travel without the crowds more and more. You know, we're looking at what's going on with coronavirus, and you know, we're not going to be wanting to be shoulder to shoulder with other people all of the time, at least not for the foreseeable future. We're going to want to travel a little bit more without the crowd. So while people are in that frame of mind, we've got a huge opportunity right now to, for the first time ever, really start to promote and encourage travels during those low seasons. So a lot of you are thinking, you know, look, I'm a small business owner. I'm not Expedia. I'm not, you know, National Geographic. You know, what can I do? And this quote, I won't read it out, but it's a quote that I really like. It's by a lady called Marianne Williamson. It's often attributed to Nelson Mandela, bizarrely, but it's not by Nelson Mandela. And it just basically says how, you know, you're playing small doesn't serve the world in the slightest. And actually, we all need to recognize the power that we have. And as we recognize the power that's within each of us, and we let our light shine, we unconsciously give permission to others to do exactly the same. And I really like that quote. So I believe that small independent businesses like you guys out there, like me, like a lot of us, will be the saviors of our industry. People are more conducive than ever before to purchase from small or smaller independent businesses. And part of that is because we're having a massive increase in the mistrust of large business. You know, the large guys are letting us down increasingly. You know, we've seen planned obsolescence with companies like Apple. Oh, hello. Sorry about that. Somebody on the line. We're seeing planned obsolescence with companies like Apple, Volkswagen, rigging environmental tests, and increasingly we're mistrustful of these big guys. And I think that we're recognizing that these giant corporations aren't to be trusted, and that's because they put, you know, shareholder profits above and beyond absolutely everything. It goes above morals and everything else, and we're starting to recognize that, and we're starting to see that now the world over. So I wanted to highlight that, you know, organizations that don't have huge private equity backing and don't necessarily serve their shareholders first at all costs. And these are three people, actually, I should say, who I have got the utmost respect for in our industry. You've got Jonathan Worsley here at Bench Events, who run huge hospitality events. And they created something called Bench Impact, which is about giving back to local communities. Wonderful business, looks after his people first and foremost, looks after his customers and his clients, and doesn't put profit above absolutely everything else. Ray Bloom, very much the same in IMEX, if any of you are familiar with that global exhibition. They run it twice a year, or they used to, in Las Vegas and Frankfurt. And the first time I went to IMEX, Ray Bloom on the last day, and by the way, thousands, if you aren't familiar with it, thousands of people go to these events. And Ray Bloom was stood at the exit, and he was shaking the hand of everybody as they went out. Thousands there. He's not a young guy either. You know, actually physically it must have been quite draining, but he wanted to thank everybody personally for taking the time to come. If IMEX was owned by a big global shareholder-led company, there is no way the person responsible for that event would take that level of care and consideration for their clients and for doing the right thing. The chap on the end there is John Howell, a former colleague of mine, a former boss of mine, former mentor of mine, and he set up Aviadev again, a small company, but what AviaDev do is they, again, look to serve the communities first and foremost. John is the CEO, and he does marathons in gorilla outfits. He takes, that's for the Gorilla Foundation, I should point out, not just for fun. But he takes a huge amount of pride in doing good. And these people, these independent businesses, they have a genuine and authentic passion for their subject, and they deeply care. They care about doing the right thing morally and ethically. And I would suggest that's what we can all do. That's how we can be different. We can support these kind of organizations, because these are the kind of organizations that are going to see us out of this. I think we know now that the big guys aren't going to be the ones to do it. And also, what else can we do? Well, in a world where everyone wants to be in the spotlight, spotlights are the most popular commodity. So I would encourage you all to be the spotlight, and just see how popular you can become when you're willing and ready to shine the light on other people. See how you become more respected and listened to. And also, see how you gain a huge amount of knowledge by being a spotlight, by having a podcast, by having a webinar, by having a blog. Be an influencer and shine the light on other people who are doing great stuff. And in that vein, I'd like to shine the light on these two, actually. Please check out both of these. You've got Mohammed Shirkavand. This guy runs a tourism live talk show on Instagram, which he's had me on as a guest for. It's a wonderful show, and Chris has been on the show as well. And when I was first asking Chris about his experience on the show, I said, I'm doing the tourism live talk. Chris said, yeah, it's 2 hours long. I was like, what? It's 2 hours long. Mohammed runs these talks, and they take a long time, but you know what? You can get more. You can talk about more in the industry and on a more of a granular level in 2 hours than you ever could if you were part of a panel for half an hour and you're one of four. In 2 hours, you can really get under the skin. And I absolutely applaud and commend Mohammed Shirkavand for setting this up and for sticking to an hour and a half, 2 hours, because in that amount of time, you can actually get more to the heart of each particular topic in more depth, and I think that's what we need more of, frankly. So please do check him out. He's on Instagram, he's on Facebook, he's on LinkedIn, and he's doing some great work, has some great guests as well. I've learned so much. The other guys, new to me quite recently. So this is Greg Gug Girard and Colin Girard, his brother. And they're a Canada show, which is just utterly wonderful. I've watched a couple of episodes now. First and foremost, you're never going to see such passion for somebody's destination as with these guys and Canada. They live and breathe Canada. I feel if you cut them in half, there's probably a maple leaf in the middle of them somewhere. It's just utterly infectious. And for me, who's traveled to Canada many times on business but never really experienced Canada, if I'm being very honest, boy, do I want to go to Canada and experience more of that destination myself. So please, check those guys out as well. And also, reach out to all of our speakers. They can help you navigate through a lot of this if you're looking to really try and do more in the industry and flatten your seasonality curve. These are some of the brightest minds that I've ever had the privilege of meeting myself. I've actually been quite intimidated by a lot of them, if I'm being very honest with you all. These guys are thoroughly knowledgeable. They're absolute experts in their respective fields. They're all independent. They're all deeply passionate about doing good in our industry, and they're all collaborators. There isn't one person on here that wouldn't absolutely welcome if you reached out to them and connected with them. So please do use the opportunity. So in summary, look, we can't and mustn't go back down the path that we were on. We know exactly where it leads us, and it's not all fairies and princesses. We've got the golden opportunity right now to proactively promote our low seasons and thus create a more sustainable year-round offering. We just need to have the courage to target the growing number of travelers who fit the low season travel profile. And finally, This is a picture which always reminds me of one of my favorite poems, actually, which is a poem by Robert Frost, which you may know. It's called "The Road Not Taken," and I'm urging all of us to go down the path that's less traveled by. You know, the quote from it is, "Two roads diverge in a wood, and we should take the one less traveled by, and that will make all the difference." And on that note, Carolyn, are you there?
Yes, I am, Jed. Sorry for the slight delay. I was lost in that forest. I love that poem too. So yes, quite a lot of questions and comments, Jed. So I'm just going to run through. Firstly, Gina says kia ora from New Zealand.
Oh, hey, kia ora.
So some other comments in response to your "how are you doing?" So people say mine's been overwhelming. My lockdown has been juggling a master's degree, no certainty about the future. I'd made the comment, I've never worked as hard before, but never had so many important conversations. And Apolline agrees with me. She said, same here, never worked as much before, never had as many great contacts as during that. Lots of people want to use your daughter's home office, so I think she could actually rent it out. I think it's
surreal.
I think it could be the new trend in offices.
Yeah.
And I'm now going to share my own moment of this, because I'm not sure if you can see, but we are actually sharing this. We do have an extra speaker here sat on my lap. And so somebody suggested, rather than recovery, maybe we went for rebirth.
Yeah, rebirth, I like
a
that.
term. Yes,
like
and we're demonstrating why you never work with children and animals, because they wander off. Then we did get to a question around this issue of the problem of over-tourism and those numbers. It talks about the decentralization of tourism. And this was, you look at Machu Picchu, governments limit the number, but the tour numbers ignore those controls. You know, what do we do, I think, about the ignoring of that control? So I've got lots more questions and comments, but I wondered if we actually wanted to address this issue of the fragmentation of the industry.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think first and foremost, we need to understand what the limits are. You know, I find it intriguing. I was speaking to who was it? It was in Brussels. They've started doing this in the Brussels Tourism Authority, and they've created an app. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Carolyn, if you came across it. They've got an app which monitors. So it's not personal data, but it monitors the movements of people, and it knows who is a Belgian national because they'll be registered to the Belgian network versus who is a foreign, it's registered outside. And this app actually tracks where the locals are versus where the tourists are. And they promote it for tourists who want to interact more with locals. And also, if they understand that there's a whole load of tourists in this area of town, then they can, naturally they can choose to, avoid that area of town and go somewhere where there are less tourists and more locals, for example. So there's that kind of technology, I think, is being used more and more. But for me, the overall part is, what is that golden number? How many can you take? If your destination was, and stick with me on this, Carolyn, because I am going somewhere with it. But on the, if your destination was a theme park, look at what theme parks do. Theme parks are incredibly good at what they do. They're really slick. They know how many really can be the optimum number for in that park. And when they reach that number, it stops. They also divert the flows around. So, you go into Universal Studios, there's a big board there, and it shows you the waiting times for the different rides. That's all about tourism dispersal. It's about dispersing people around. Where you see a queue for 3 hours, you're just going to think, right, I'm not going to go there. I'm not sure there is always a queue of 3 hours, by the way, there. I don't know if I trust those things. But that's the intention that they have, is moving people around. They do it really well. We almost need to, gosh, am I going to say this? We need to treat our destinations like a theme park. First of all, what's the capacity on any given day? And then the next step then is, once we know what that number is, how do we manage that? How do we manage that? Is that linked with access to the destination in terms of air access, in terms of road access, rail access? I don't know. There's brighter minds out there that probably have got more answers for that. But I think the starting block has to be, we have to know what is the optimum number of visitors that our destination can take.
Well, it's interesting because I know I'm not so familiar with the Belgian one, but I do know Vienna has been an absolute
Okay.
leader in this. And again, they've used a theory that a lot of, I think, the world's leading destinations who are managing this, like Amsterdam, like Copenhagen, which is we're all residents. It's just how long we're residents for. So
Yeah.
they look at us as part of a
Temporary
network.
resident. I love that.
Yeah, so it's that idea of we've all got connection to this. And they're looking at a way that they can actually use that mobile signal to put up signage so that, let's say you're walking from the ring towards the Schönbrunn Palace, and it can literally put up notices to say, there's currently a 2-hour queue, as you say, for Universal Studios, but this attraction's currently got lower numbers, or and that they can actually use that, the same kind of thing. But I think when you say it makes you feel afraid to say we're like to work like a theme park, people look at the theme park part of that. I think what we
Yeah.
have to remember is that theme parks are just a very contained place. And I think when we look at this idea of place management, that yes, I definitely think we have lessons to learn about, you know, ownership of place, and sense of that, what's the experience that's going to work. And also probably some of that springs from, like, you don't actually want your staff being abused for that. So I definitely think, I mean, I've used some measures that are probably not very sophisticated at a smaller level when I'm working with precincts. You know, we can actually look at the amount of space that's there. We can look at who's going to be there on a normal day. We can look at the space of that and say, well, look, what's the throughput that you can manage? But I think the bit that's missing is the enforcement. And I really would probably link that to the comments you made about that being a spotlight. In tourism, we're often really afraid to offend people. And we've confused the idea of being welcoming with feeling like we have to welcome everyone. And I guess that's where I'd see some of that coming into that. So definitely there. Um, Now, this is an interesting follow-on to that, Ged, from John Howell, who's on the call, so you would have heard all the nice things you said
John.
about him.
There you go. You owe me £5 for that, John, by the way.
Yes, I particularly probably appreciate it. Thank you from me, from John, because I know it's pretty early in the morning for you guys.
Yeah,
So tourism's too long driven by this basic metric of growth. And I think John Koldovsky in his session, and John is also on the line today, talked about this. He said, who really wants 2,000 tourists charging in to spend very little? He brackets, other than a tourism authority CEO who has been charged with hitting the number. So what should be the new metric? How do we measure success for tourism?
Well, I think that's the big question, really, isn't it? How do you measure success for tourism? I think you would measure it on, it would be a couple of measures. You know, we all know it, and it's often talked about, you know, what the guys in Bhutan are doing. So for anybody out there that isn't familiar with it, they measure famously gross national happiness. So everybody in Bhutan fills out a questionnaire, and it's quite a lengthy and you know, it's not just 5 questions or anything. It's quite a lengthy questionnaire which impacts absolutely every part of their lives. And then what they've done is, you know, with that, they measure the gross national happiness and how happy and content everybody is with every aspect of their life. And then using that, they obviously try and balance the number of visitors which they can have. So, you know, it's really carefully managed in Bhutan as to how many visitor arrivals they can welcome, and it's managed from a governmental level. I actually think that's a pretty slick way to do it. I actually think that works pretty well. It's incredibly courageous of those guys to do that, and it would be incredibly courageous for anybody else to do that. I don't think that if it's the right expression, I don't think we've got the balls to do it. I think we're too kind of scared, because we're so used to, you know, lines have to keep going up. If you're the Minister for Tourism, you know, your arrivals have got to go up. If you're at the helm when those arrivals dip, then it's viewed that you're not doing a good enough job. It should be measured by, you know, by the community, by the destination itself. We're always very focused on the travelers, and I can understand that. We want to welcome people, and there's a hospitality side of that. but also we have to really, start putting more of a focus on the communities that live in each destination. I don't know how many people in Venice that live in Venice are actually, from Venice that live in Venice. Same in London. I don't know. Are people getting squeezed out? Is that right? Is that the kind of world we want to live in? I don't think it is, and I think that we can do something about it. But we need strong leadership, Carolyn. And I'm slightly hesitating because you always get nervous when you're having a pop at those in power. But yeah, I think we've been let down by our leaders. And actually, I would say in terms of the travel and tourism industry, I think we've been let down. I don't think they've done enough.
Well, I think, and I mean, maybe what we need to do, Ged, is, because as you say, one always a bit nervous about having a pop at people, but I think we can actually shout out for some of the people who are doing some really great work in this area. Now, it's not specifically tourism, but one of the destinations that I've been most impressed with is the work that Amsterdam's done in applying the idea of donut economics, i.e., what's the safe space where we look at economic growth, but we look at our ability to sustain and support that growth. So we don't see it as this. Actually, I sometimes advise this clients on this with brand equity as well, which is we don't assume that this is this endless pit we can keep shoveling stuff out of without actually having to put something back in. And they've actually done their city plan, which includes tourism, among other things. And it's entirely built around this principle of that safe and just space. And all of their planning now sits and looks through that lens. We've mentioned, probably other people are getting a bit like, because you mentioned someone else, but the guys over in New Zealand and Tourism Bay of Plenty, very similar thing, that they've actually sat back. They worked with Destination Think, who I'm a huge fan of their work, and they've looked at that and created that space where it's around that community-based consent of what we're willing to share. And that basic principle actually goes to the heart of almost anything. And it shouldn't be, we've got the frameworks are all there. I mean, there's a document that I use in a lot of my culture and heritage consulting that's actually created by the government of Canada. And they talk about those 3 steps, which is understand what you've got, understand what you've shared, and understand what people want to share. And you start looking at that going, you put it down to that, it's not really that hard, is it? Often there's a simplicity to this, but we've actually got to believe that we can change it, and we've got to look at those measures. And some of the things I'm talking to some clients about at the moment are things like looking at what's the lifetime value of a client, because that stops us getting those people who just want to come in, what we used to call them the tick list travelers, and focuses on the guys who are going to come and come back again, or have some connection to place, do we actually, we've looked at places like Palau, Hawaii, New Zealand, and some of the other Pacific islands all have a pledge. So when you sign to go into those destinations, you actually pledge to be a good visitor. And I think we need to look at some of those things too.
I love that. They do that in Iceland as well. I know they have the Icelandic tourism pledge, which I think is great. But I think you're right. For me, what I'm always sort of trying to do is, I've always been the traveller where if the example I always tell people, actually, when you talk about New Zealand, myself and Sarah went to New Zealand, gosh, back in 2000, my one and only time in New Zealand, and we knew that we had 2 weeks to quote unquote do New Zealand, which is impossible. So people were sort of saying to us, locals were saying, look, you can either race around both islands, really quickly, and you're not going to get much of a chance to take it in, or with 2 weeks, you're probably better off just choosing one island and really, getting under the skin of it as best you can in 2 weeks. So we figured, okay, that's the way to go. And they said, well, look, everybody goes to the South. You've got to go to the South Island. South Island is dramatic. It's beautiful. It's everything else. Everyone goes to the South Island. You've got to. It's a must. It was like a red rag to a bull, Carolyn. I was like, okay. I looked at Sarah and she was the same. She was like, North Island. I was like, yeah, absolutely, North Island. We're the kind of people who, we go for the underdog. If everybody's going to that particular site, we will literally turn around and go in the opposite direction. We want to get something different. And the irony was, as we traveled around these wonderful destinations in the North Island, Napier and all these kind of places, which are wonderful. And we tell people, and they say, oh, you're over from the UK, okay. You're going down to the South Island. We said, no, we're just spending 2 weeks here on the North Island. Oh, fair play to you, mate. They were really appreciative of the fact that we weren't bothering with the South Island. I am, by the way, gutted that I haven't seen the South Island in New Zealand, because I do believe it is absolutely breathtaking. But I'm hoping that one day I will get there. But I that's the kind of ethos that I'm trying to tap into, is people who actually want to go against the flow. And that's what I'm trying to encourage. And that's what I want. If every destination was to start to encourage people that are against the flow, there's always going to be people that are going to want to go to the South Island. And there will be. And I understand that we've got to market it. But I try and tap into the people that have got that psyche of, I want to do something actually, different, whether it be at a different time of the year or a different destination.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that I was really enjoying your analysis of the kind of the fares to Rome, because I actually went to Rome at exactly your low season time. And well, firstly, it's actually pretty spectacularly warm in Rome in December.
Yeah, it can be quite mild, actually. Yeah.
But secondly, I think everyone talks about the cost of things, and I think that's maybe an opportunity, because people are going to have to look at their budgets a bit more carefully now.
Sure.
So I think if we're actually saying to people, well, what are you traveling for? And I always laugh at this idea, this question that comes up all the time, and you may even have been asked this yourself, Ged, which is are you a traveler or are you a tourist? To me, it's almost like if you're a traveler, you're not measuring success of, I have to be there when it's bright and sunny or whatever. Similarly, I think, so, and the other thing is, some of these destinations are year-round. I suspect the problem is in Venice, that there's actually no such thing as a good time to be in Venice to get away from the crisis.
But, do you know what's interesting is I've never been to Venice, Carolyn, and honestly, from all that I've heard, and I've spoken to people about it, genuinely, for the experience that I would like to have in Venice, I think I've missed the opportunity. I've written it off now. I'm not interested in going to Venice, because genuinely, for the experience I would like to have, I've missed the boat on that. It's not going to happen for me. It's kind of ruined. So I don't aspire to go to Venice. I have been to Trieste, which is an hour away from Venice, and it's breathtaking. And comparatively speaking, there's hardly any tourism. And I'm walking around Trieste, which is actually the heart of, the home of coffee, although they don't grow any, obviously. But they have wonderful coffee and a cafe culture. And I'm walking around all this incredible architecture and squares that are, all right, not quite as big as St. Peter's Square, but breathtaking. And I'm just thinking, well, where's all the tourists? There's nobody here. And I'm laughing to myself. I've got the whole place to myself. I was there it was in February. Clear skies, sun was shining, it was cold. There was as they call it, the border, the wind which comes in. Utterly wonderful. Talk about engaging with the local population. I mean, there wasn't anybody that wasn't local there, and it's less than an hour from all of those major airports in Venice. I'm just thinking, this is insane. Why aren't we doing more to promote these kind of destinations at these times of the year? Because the experience is wonderful. We need to be unashamed of that, and we need to knock the fear out. And I think a lot of it is people have a fear. What's it going to be like in Thailand if I go during the rainy season, or in Kenya during the rainy season? What's it going to be like? Is it going to be ruined? Am I going to be rained out? We all know that in most, or an awful lot of the rainy seasons, whether it be the Caribbean or, Southeast Asia, it doesn't rain all day, every day. And actually, sometimes it can add a little bit more reality to the tropics, which is where you are. It's meant to rain in the tropics. What are you going for this destination for? You just want to lie on a beach all day? Well, frankly, yeah, go in the summer season, pay 5 times the price, and do that. But don't go to these destinations if that's all you want to do. That sounds probably quite snobby. I don't mean it to sound snobby, but that's genuinely how I feel about it.
Well, I'm probably a bit more mixed on this, because I was actually due to be leaving Venice today, but I was traveling for an event. Yes, I was supposed to be rowing in, but an event that would enable us to connect with locals, which is they have a big rowing race called the Vogalonga, which is basically to row around the canals of Venice. And apparently it's for one of those things where that hasn't lost that connection to place. But it actually, the second part of my trip was then to go on to the Dolomites. And one of my big challenges was, and I think this is where we need to shift the supply side of this, is it's actually really hard to go walking in the Dolomites in the first part of June, because none of the buses, for example, none of the local buses run beyond the immediate essential ones to get kids to school until the middle of June. So for me, traveling as a low season traveler, I was expecting to do a lot of very long walks in and out on roads or hire Ubers. So, and I know that that's been a problem, you know, here in Australia, Tasmania. Traditionally, if you wanted to go to Tasmania out of season, it was pretty tough because most things closed down. Now, Stu Spears, who's also on the line, who talked in our events, talked about how Dark Mofo started to change that. But I think that's the other thing is, you know, that how do we get people to balance that demand and realize that there will be things to do, and it is worth opening for visitors at that time.
It's a really hard one. It is that classic chicken and egg, isn't it? But you know, when you look at Tasmania, you know, my first point would be, you know, I don't know a huge amount about Tasmania. I confess I'm completely ignorant to it. I've heard it's a wonderful spot, but you know, really, people of Tasmania, is your destination? Is it special? Is it worth visiting in the winter months or whenever is the low season months? And if so, what is it that's great about that? Because I just believe that there are, you know, it's that a cliche, Carolyn. There is beauty absolutely everywhere if you look for it. And sometimes we don't appreciate what's on our doorstep. So I'm the first to say, you know, I often say, look, I'm here north of Manchester. You know, I'm speaking to you guys in Sydney, and I'm like, oh man, why don't I live in Sydney? And I'll speak to somebody else who's based in Mallorca, and I'm like, oh great, why do I live here? And then I go out for a walk, and I always moan, by the way, the fact we haven't got a garden. We've got the tiniest little square yard where the girls sunbathe underneath the washing that's hanging out above them because there isn't space. And we walk 10 minutes down the road, and we're in the most breathtaking countryside. And even in the winter, there's a place called Hollingworth Lake near us, and it's, you know, it's utterly wonderful. You walk around the lake, and it's about sort of 3-4K. And it's absolutely gorgeous, rolling green hills, and on a day like today, it's sunny and it's nice. But even in the winter, there's a certain bleakness to it where you're up on the moors near the Pennines there, and it's great. And part of me thinks, you know, I'm taking this for granted, but actually, there are people in the world that would absolutely love to visit where I live, and I'm starting to recognize that more and more. And I think we all need to recognize our own destinations and what's great about those destinations at different times of the year, because I think we just take it for granted.
I think we do. Now, a quick question. No doubt he'll be delighted for the shout out as well. Mohammed Shokavand is on the call, and he's going,
oh, hey,
how can we increase the value of tourism during low seasons as we miss it mostly during high seasons? So I drilled a bit further into that, Ged, to make sure we understood what that question was. So he's saying most tourists get engaged with attractions rather than getting deep into the cultural values of the destinations because it's crowded, because of the infrastructure and the time-related issues of destinations. So how do we get people to understand that, you know, the value of getting under the skin a bit more?
I think that's, I mean, it's probably a better one for someone like you, Carolyn, almost. You know, it's a marketing question, though. It's about positioning, and it's about how we communicate. And we have to try and understand, you know, again, you know, travel during the low seasons, you know, ridiculous though it is, really, it hasn't been done before in terms of the industry getting together in any kind of a unified way to promote proudly our low seasons. It hasn't really been done before. You know, Stu Spears said it best. You know, we've kind of, each destination has on their own tried to create events to try and, you know, boost their particular sides, but as an industry we haven't really tried to tackle it. So I think we need to do more research. You'll be glad to know, Carolyn, you'd have to be involved on it. Hopefully there'll be cash for you somewhere on this, but we need to do more research on, you know, these people that do travel during the low seasons. What are their personality profiles? What kind of people are they? Yeah, I'm pretty confident that they're growing in number, but we need to start to substantiate this, you know, and find out where are they and how do we communicate best to them. And you know, the irony is, and I'm the first to say, I'm trying to talk about, we've got an opportunity now where peak seasons, you know, if you're looking at, you know, Europe, large parts of southern and northern Europe, the peak seasons are the summer months for a variety of reasons. That is going to be decimated So we do need to promote the lower seasons, but it's probably not going to be the same people. I don't necessarily think that somebody who travels during the peak season is somebody who is always going to travel during the low season as well. There'll be exceptions, so people that will travel maybe twice in a year or 3 times in a year, where they will go, because of the kids' holidays, they'll go with the kids during the summer months, but then they can also travel during low season months when they don't need to go with the kids for the kids' holiday. But what are the traveler profiles of people that travel typically during a peak season versus during a low season? I don't know. I can probably have a guess and a feel for it, but as you always very rightly point out, Carolyn, you need evidence on this. It's not good enough just to have a hunch.
Well, there is actually quite a lot of evidence out, not across the industry, Ged. I think we've never looked at it as that specific lens. But it wouldn't actually be that hard to do. But for example, Adventure Travel Trade Association, ATA, has looked at this for who takes adventure holidays out of season. And they see 2 specific audiences, which is one which skews older affluent. And the other is, again, quite often solo or group female travelers will travel then. Again, all sorts of cultural reasons for determining that. So that's definitely 2 audiences that I know when I'm encouraging people to say, look, if you are trying to build that year-round profile, definitely be thinking about that. And my former business partner, Bronwyn White, that older demographic is definitely hers. And she said they are absolutely your #1 audience, because no ties, no having to worry about taking the kids out of school or agony around this. Quite often very good levels of high disposable income. I mean, there's societal problems with the degree to which we have intergenerational inequalities, but definitely if you're a tourism destination, there's there. And the interesting thing about that is they're almost completely invisible in most tourism marketing. We talk about the key demographics of being 18 to 53-year-olds. 18 to 54-year-olds, and they're completely invisible, or they're presented in very stereotypical ways. So they're definitely audiences. The other one I think is, think about where, that habitual behavior that you talked about of people traveling at certain times of year, and we know that that's absolutely hardwired in. Targeting those markets, if it's your out of season when it's their in season, can actually be a really great thing to do. So quite a lot of, it may be a surprise to some people around the world, but there are bits of Australia where it does get cold. And not just Melbourne, sorry, that's a Sydney joke. But if you look at pretty much the southern part of New South Wales, most of Victoria in winter, places like South Australia and Kangaroo Island, it gets pretty cold. We've actually got snow on our mountains at the moment. We're looking forward to a good ski season. And the people, I was in Kangaroo Island last August for an industry workshop, and the place was full of Italians, because it's impossible to get Italians to understand that you travel outside peak seasons. Behaviorally, it's very rare, but they don't care if it's cold where they go. They know it's going to be cold in Australia, but they travel in July and August. So if you're looking to do that, those hotels were full of international tourists, simply because it was looking at that habitual behavior in a different way. And I think that it's a great example of thinking about who's coming at that time of year.
I love that. I think that's definitely a way that you can it can work to your favor if you've got markets like that, like with the Italian market. And I think as well, you've got destinations, since I started down this road, initially, a year and a half or whatever, when I came up with this on the low season traveler side, people were saying to me, well, you're obviously not including anything to do with families then, because school holidays are peak season, so obviously that's not your market. And initially I was thinking, okay, I'll take the sort of the over 50s whose kids have flown the nest and the under 30s who haven't got kids yet. That's a big enough market to go at. I'm not worried by that. But then as I got under the skin of this, there's just so many destinations that have got their low seasons during school holidays, and it's not awful, it's not scary, it's not bad. People talk about it in a bad way. Not the right example, but I just wanted to bear with me on this for the comparison. Las Vegas in July and August is hotter than hell.
Yes.
Let me tell you, they do a roaring trade. People are not put off. The Brits, they'll go there, no problem whatsoever. There's flights from Manchester, or there was until recently, London, you name it. They'll go to Las Vegas. Would they go and stay in Dubai? Oh, you're crazy. It's the desert. Yeah, do you know the heat in Dubai in the summer? Yeah, it's not that much hotter than Las Vegas, but you go to Las Vegas. It's about perception. There's a fear. When you do go to Dubai in July and August, it is hotter than hell, but they have temperature controlled pools. You can still have a fair experience. And by the way, you're paying a fraction of the price as well. Is it utterly awful and you'll wish you never went? No. Frankly, it's not. The same with Madrid. People talk about not going to Madrid in August, which is, yes, by the way, the low season. You can get great deals Madrid in August if you want a weekend break. Sun shining, and it is hot. Well, it's not hotter than the sun. Let's get things in perspective here. You're talking about, between 30 and 35 degrees. Maybe it might get up to 36, 37 degrees. But can you still enjoy everything that Madrid has to offer? Is it all still open? Yeah, absolutely. Is it the kids' school holidays? Yeah, absolutely. Would the kids have a good time? Yeah, absolutely. We need to understand that. One more example, Antigua. Antigua, wonderful destination. Caribbean destination, as we all know. Antigua's low season, June, July, early August. Low season. Why? It tends to have more rain, but anybody that knows Antigua, again, if you look at those rainfall charts, and we were dreadful in the travel industry at this, Carolyn, because as a travel agent, we always used to do it. They used to say, we're thinking about going to Antigua, what's the weather like? And we'd go to the rainfall chart straight away. And you see that bell-shaped curve yet again,
yeah.
And the peak was in June and July. And they were like, oh, I'm not going then. It's like ridiculous. The reality is, in June and July, for about 2, maybe 3 hours a day, usually in the evenings, it rains like you have never seen rain in your life before. But for the rest of the time, it's actually quite dry, and it's quite a wonderful occasion. And when that rain comes down in the afternoon, when you've been on the beach, and it starts to come down, and you rush to the side of the beach where there's inevitably some kind of a thatched beach bar, and you hunker in there for 2 or 3 hours as it starts to get dark and the rain's pouring. And while you're in there, you're drinking cocktails and you're thinking, you know what? I'm not even going outside again until this rain stops. But you're all in there together. Whoever's in that bar, once that rain starts, you're all in there together, and you've got a common bond. You're all in there until the rain stops, because no way is anybody going out there in that. And then when the rain stops, you do dissipate. But what a wonderful experience. Is that a worse experience than the peak time when it's dry? Absolutely not. In my opinion, it's a much better experience. Is it during the summer holidays when the kids are off? Yeah, it is actually. But how many people know about it? We have a fear, and we need to overcome the fear. And that's through communicating and educating people.
And also it's about, one big audience for Outback Australia, for example, who comes, it's like Dubai, or it is hot. I have to tell you, it will go down to 40 degrees at midnight. But the German backpackers or long-term drive market, they adore it. They'll actually complain if it gets down to 35 degrees, because that's not what they came for. Oh, yes.
My God.
And they are the savior of regional areas in what is their low season. Or another great example of that, again, Stu's stuff, you may remember he referenced something called the Parks Elvis Festival. Again, it's typically 38, 40 degrees in Parks, but the festival is so cool. It's like, wall to wall Elvises. I must admit, some of them are hot and bothered. So I can definitely recommend that.
That's absolutely on my list.
You have to go. It's January the 7th. It's around the time of Elvis's birthday. But you need to give 2 years. It'll take you 2 years to get in to book.
Really?
Unless you're prepared to truck in 40, 50 kilometers to do it.
Wow.
So a good question, picking up on this issue of small businesses versus large businesses from Sean. Ged. Agree on your point with small business having the ability to drive change. The challenge is the big ones have the capital to buy out the smaller ones, and then, or just capture the market and beat them on price with the same or similar quality. Is there a way for smaller businesses to work together to collaborate? And if so, what are the networks or frameworks that we can use to do that?
Look, my take on that is, look, can small businesses collaborate? Yes. I think the biggest danger is, and this is just what I've sort of noticed myself really as much as anything, is as small businesses, we're fighting so hard to get any business that we can that is parochial the right word? We kind of just want to look out for ourselves. We tend not to be quite as giving to others because we want to make sure that we're getting it back, and if they're not going to give it back to me, and we're kind of not mistrustful, but I think we need to be a little bit more open, and that was my point with about really trying hard and making a concerted effort to be a spotlight. I'm trying since the lockdown especially to shine a light on other businesses, because I know intrinsically what it's like myself. So if I can shine a light on any other businesses, if I can connect people, anything I can do, because I believe that the smaller guys do need to stick together and they do need to help each other out. And I will absolutely play my role. And I'm just going to have to hope and trust that the other parties will do exactly the same. But it falls down pretty quickly if people don't play the game. You always sort of see it where I see it occasionally on Facebook. I'm sure you've all seen this, where it's like, hey, we should all like each other's page. There's 40,000 of us on here, and if we all do this right, then we're all going to get 40,000 visitors. And whoever wrote that post, by the way, gets the lion's share of all of the likes that are there to be had. But the rest further down the list don't. And that's where it's kind of tough. But I think that look, the starting point for small businesses is they're led by individuals who deeply care, first and foremost. They care because they love the travel industry, they love the planet, they love the earth that we live in, and they love society. But also they care because it's their business, and it's up to them whether they make that a success or not. And that's why Ray Bloom, in whatever age he is, will be stood outside IMEX shaking everybody's hands. Probably not shaking hands anymore, by the way, due to coronavirus. But,
probably a bit of elbow bumping.
Probably a bit of elbow bumping. But that's why he does that, because it's his business, and no one cares more about that business than he does, because he's the owner. So that's natural. But he cares because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to show his appreciation. Does that happen at, and I'm not picking on them, but they're not on the call, so it doesn't matter anyway. But those big Roots events where I used to work, does the event director stand at the exit, and would they shake the hands of everybody there and thank everybody personally? No, not really, because they're getting paid either way, and it doesn't really matter. It's just a big company. They don't care to that degree, and they make their decisions in the same way, Carolyn. And that's what frightened me. I've worked for the big companies, and profits absolutely come first. You have to deliver for those shareholders, and it has to be increased profits. And if that means, even though, and I've been in the meetings, we all know around that table, this isn't the right thing to do. This feels very, very wrong. But ultimately, whoever the event director is, or the head of that particular organization, they'll say, nope, that's the way it has to be. And that's because if they hit the targets, they get their bonus as well. Everybody's just kind of, it just falls down. And that's why the future, if we're going to have a really good, sustainable future for the global travel industry, it has to be us as the small guys. We need to, in answer to the question, we need to learn and find a way to work together better. Because if we don't, the big guys sure as hell aren't going to do it. It's just going to go back down the road that we were at. The numbers just need to keep going up. And as long as the number goes up, those kind of, the bean counters are happy. And unfortunately, the rest of the world is not going to benefit from that. And it's going to harm the communities that we serve.
I will just do, again, you did a shout out for Greg and Colin, the crazy Canucks, as I know.
Yeah.
And I do encourage you to tune in, because when they interview you, because I seriously do make sure you've got lots of I'm trying to think what the equivalent of Canadiana is for the UK, but I would drape the places in Union Jacks and top hats and whatever, because believe me, you'll never see so much Canadiana. I was feeling a little bit bare. I'd left all my koalas elsewhere. But they're actually building, and similarly Suzanne Kavanagh from Creative Planet down here in Australia, they're actually building these connections of local communities where they're creating the frameworks to do this. And they had a post in LinkedIn today about the work that they're doing, where businesses in Nicola Valley have come together and created that local association. And there is that, the reciprocity is built into doing some of that stuff. But even for big businesses, I do want to do a bit of a shout out to some businesses who I think got big by doing the right thing. You look at some of, again, the Intrepid Travels and the G Adventures of this world, they got big by doing the right thing. And if we look across at sectors like Patagonia, so Patagonia has basically, it's dealt with the issue of waste in its areas of, they've got circular fashion. You buy your Patagonia jacket, when it wears out, you take it back and they dispose it. So, you know, there are companies who are proving that the old model doesn't work. And when I read from McKinsey's saying that, you know, those models aren't going to work anymore and we need to frame it, I know that we do have this time has made us sit and think about how we get through. So I do think there are some examples
Yeah,
there.
good point. Good point.
We do have some requests, Ged, whether people can use the slides or share your slides with other people. I presume you
absolutely, absolutely. No problem whatsoever. We'll get those put online after the call. No issue.
Okay. And a question from Kevin. So low season promotions can enhance many destinations. Cooperation of airlines is essential. If not as many airlines survive COVID-19, what might be the result? Will low season prices be substantially closer to shoulder and high season questions? Oh, that's a bit of a curly one, Kevin.
Yeah, you know, Kevin, I sincerely hope so, because for me, I don't think that the biggest plus point for the low seasons is the price. For me, the whole issue of traveling during the low seasons, the benefits of traveling during the low season, is that it's less crowded, more local interaction, better use of your time, experiencing something new. You know, you can go to an old destination that many people have gone to, but you're having a completely different experience during the low seasons, and that to me is the stuff that's powerful. The half price element of the example that I gave, that to me is that's inconsequential, actually, because you know I don't just want to. I mean, I want to save money, and I think that's important, but actually, you know, I really do think that the tourism offering during the low seasons is every bit as valuable as it is during the peak seasons, but it's supply and demand. So I think, you know, in answer to your question, if demand sufficiently increases for the low seasons, then prices will rise. Yeah, and actually, you know, great. Good. That's good for you. It's good for me. It's good for everybody in the industry, and as well because it starts to flatten it out. And the more people that travel during the low seasons, the more people will talk about these great experiences that they've had, and more people will aspire to travel during the low seasons. And then you will start to flatten out the seasonality, and that is only going to be a good thing for everybody.
Okay, now I'm going to say this is a real compliment to your presentation. We're getting some really curly questions coming through now, Ged.
Okay.
So one from Judy. There are sites with seasonal preference due to religious holidays.
Yep.
How do we handle high numbers to those with religious preference? And I remember being in India, to take Judy's point, a few years ago, where they were talking about, you know, there are sites in India where when we talk about seasonality, there's a 5-day period when 4 million people visit, and then no one comes the rest of the year.
I think there's. I mean, look, there's not much. There's not a huge amount that you can do about that.
No.
Really, if it's religious reasons, you know, if you're talking about, you know, the Hajj or whatever, you know, what can you do about that? I think all that you can kind of do is, you know, you can still encourage people to experience what everybody else experiences at different times of the year if they're not from that religion, because, you know, the time of the year isn't as important to them. So you've still got an opportunity to grow, and that's the whole point with this. You know, you talk about, you know, like the beach there in Salou was pretty horrendous, Levant Beach, during the peak season. But here's the thing: is if that destination can conceivably cope with, I don't know, 10 million visitors during those key 3 or 4 months, and it can actually cope, and, you know, the community still benefit and nothing is taken away from it, then here's the deal: if you promote the low seasons, actually, you know, you can welcome more visitors. So I think the whole point that I'm trying to say is, you know, as an industry, I'm not saying tourism growth is bad. You know, despite the fact that what it might sound like, I'm not saying that relentless march to 2030 and, you know, whatever it is, 2 billion international arrivals, I'm not necessarily saying that that's bad. I actually think that as a world we can take a lot more tourists. I just think it's about how we spread them around, and that's the problem. So what I'm trying to say is, if we do want to keep seeing tourism growth around the world, and we all want to benefit from that, then, you know, the only way that we can do that in a sustainable, realistic manner is by spreading out the seasonality. There is no other option. You can't just keep funneling it into the same places at the same time of the year and developing new places to be deeply seasonal as well. That's not sustainable. Building new hotels and new resorts on a new island in the Caribbean, that's not right, is it? Because then those same resorts are going to be 20% occupied for 6 months of the year. How's that sustainable? Is that the best use out of those resources? Of course it's not. This is childlike in its simplicity, utterly childlike. I envisage this, forgive me on this, Carolyn, but the way, and I was looking for a graphic to show this, because the way in which I envisage it is if you can all imagine 12 transparent cans of baked beans, okay? Baked bean cans was how I was envisaging this. I was envisaging the tourist as beans, baked beans, if you will. And I was imagining that in the middle there for June, July, and August, you've got beans overflowing out of the top, and you've got a dribble of beans in the rest. And what we're trying to say is we need to get more tourism in, those same cans. And even a kid would say, well, just fill the other cans. Like, what are you doing? And that's just it. It's childlike in its simplicity. Yeah. But we need to make a conscious effort to it. We need to actually promote it. And we need to put a focus on promoting those low seasons and, be unashamed to do so. I want to put more of a focus on low season than travel the rest of the time, because we need to rebalance it. One of the things I equate it to, again, if you'll sort of forgive the parallel, but actually it's in terms of sexism, in terms of the roles of women. I've got friends that have sort of said, oh, we do too much to pander to women. And it's like, no, we have to rebalance things first. We can't treat everybody the same, because some people said to me, oh, we need to treat everybody just the same. Forget about that. And it's like, no, we need to have more representation of women until things are balanced. So actually, we do need to focus more on women around the world. And then once we've got that balance, then absolutely we'll treat everybody the same. Absolutely, level it out. But at the moment, it's not a level playing field. And until it is a level playing field, we have to put that focus there. And that's the same with the low seasons. Forgive the slight parallel.
No, I think both of those things, one of the things I suspect you get, Ged, and this is a question from me, because I get the same thing when we talk about this issue with women, is people will start giving you all this rationalization. So for example, I attend an annual digital conference, and they had this a whole area where there was not one woman business that was featured, and they said, oh, well, no one put their hand up. And I'm like, well, that's the rationalization. That's not the answer. It's sending the wrong message. So do you get that with low season when you talk to people start explaining to you all the reasons they can't rather than all the reasons they can without thinking about it?
I find it fascinating because, again, this is, you're right, Carolyn, this is all very much linked with psychology. Huge amounts of this is all about psychology. And the nearest answer I'll give you to that is when I used to work at, well, it was at Roots, actually. So I used to sit on the senior management team. And if you'd have an idea for the business in general, you'd say, look, I want to put this out there. I've got this idea. What do you think about if we did X, Y, and Z? And what happens around the room, you get different people that will basically start listing immediately why it won't work, why it's a bad idea, and everything else. So I used to change the question. I used to frame the question of, look, if we were going to do X, Y, and Z, how would we make that work? That's my question. How would we make it work? Just to get them more focused on, the solutions rather than knocking it. But our human instinct seems to be always to find problems. And I get it all the time. People like, it won't work because of this. And then you'll knock that one on the head. And then now it won't work because of this. And I'm like, Jesus, just try and see the solutions first. Is it the right thing to do? First of all, that's the starting point. Is it right to promote tourism during the low seasons to flatten the curve? If our answer to that is a unanimous yes, then let's figure it out. We're all smart people. Let's figure it out. Let's not come up with the problems as to why it won't work. There's probably a million reasons why it won't work, but there's also actually quite a lot of reasons why it will work and why we can make it work. And that's the frame of mind. So it's that sort of positioning, Carolyn. I think you're right. You have to position the question.